we'll have a good natter about it. So I know that we're all feeling this. I don't need to explain why, but I think even pre-COVID, right? Have you ever been in those situations where you just cannot peel yourself away from the couch or Netflix or Facebook or the bottle of wine? You're just so bloody tired, right? And you cannot even make yourself go to bed. I've been in those situations where I can't even sleep and I know I'm horribly tired, right? And you know you're not at your best and you're operating from a place of either tired most of the time or all of the time. You seem to be sort of saying to people, I'm just tired. And the tank is empty, right? There's no denying it. Now, for us recently, 2020 did not relent. And these sort of early days of 2021 have been a bit of a nightmare. And many of us have, the phrase emotionally exhausted often sounds, I think sometimes, and even burnout can sometimes can feel a bit extreme for us when we're just like, oh, I'm not sure that this, I'm emotionally exhausted or I'm burnt out. And we'll talk about what some of the symptoms are in a moment. And sometimes people can get caught up in the fact that these things sound quite extreme, but there's a process of getting to complete emotional depletion and burnout. And it's recognizing when you're on that trajectory and putting things in place. That's what we're sort of talking about now, but not only for you, but your teams, right? As managers, colleagues, we're parents, family members, community members. We really, in this moment, as leaders, need to be looking out for the signs in others, because burnout is a very, very hard place to come back from. It's a very, very serious thing. So we've all experienced the frustration, the heartbreak, right? There's been a huge amount of, racial unrest, unpredictable events, the isolation. It's been incredibly demanding. Many of us have had to learn to operate in a completely different way. And I was explaining just a moment ago to Jane that, our brains are, when we're in moments of certain uncertainty, especially in a moment like this, like a global crisis, our brains are working harder. It's working harder because it's trying to work out how to operate. It's working out what new expectations it has and how to survive and thrive in this sort of new world. And that is taking a lot more brain energy. So we are more tired. Many of us are working in a completely different way, whether that's working, caring for sick loved ones, teaching children, whilst trying to stay healthy, sane of mind, and remain as connected as we can. And unfortunately, the burden doesn't feel like it's subsided, and it only seems to sort of grow heavier by the day. So that many of us are sort of asking, how much more can we take? 𝐭𝐬 Wright, Senior Director of the Health Care Innovation, she's an American psychologist, describes emotional exhaustion as a sense of overwhelmingness. Now, I'm hearing this come up in different ways. I'm just feeling overwhelmed. I'm just really tired. I haven't got any energy. I don't want to do anything, even the things that I love doing. So it's coming up in all sorts of ways. And this sort of getting to the point of emotional exhaustion is feeling overwhelmed to the point where you feel like you don't have the capacity to deal with everyday stresses, with the things that are happening in everyday life. It's physical tiredness, it's mental tiredness, it's difficulty concentrating, it's all the things that we experience when we're just at our capacity. And I call this like when we're below okay base zero. So I talk a lot about this with my coaching clients, because they will be dealing with challenges at work, conflict, or they want a pay rise or they want a promotion, and they're dealing with the inner critic, or they're dealing with all of these sort of superficial things. And actually, one of the most fundamental elements that is causing a lot of those things is this complete depletion. They're completely sort of depleted of all energy, that they can't even cope with some of the challenges that they're experiencing. So this is often the first thing that we do when I work with somebody. Unfortunately, most of us don't have the luxury of stepping away from our responsibilities, and that's a fact, right? We've got financial concerns, we have to work, we have to care for children, family members, colleagues are in need, staff are in need. And in this period of great uncertainty, we can't eliminate some of the biggest stresses that exist for us right now, and nor can we predict what is going to come next. Ooh, let me just plug my laptop charger in. There we go. So let's talk about some of the issues around this that we're experiencing, and then we're going to go to some of the things that we can do about it, right? So the busy badge of honor. As part of this busyness culture we live in, we really can end up wearing busy like it's a badge of honor, like it equals success and it equals that I'm important, often compromising our own health in our constant need to be productive, efficient, do more and have more. And this is absolutely as a result of our environment. Don't get me wrong, this isn't your fault, our fault. This is the environment that we're operating in. We're having to wear it and do it because we're trying to keep up. We're trying to operate in a world that is busy. And unfortunately, certainly my time in the corporate world, and I was guilty of this, very guilty of this, it's become this symbol of success, of how, bloody busy we are. I would often, people would ask me, oh, how are you? And I'd be like, oh, it's just so busy. Even if it wasn't, because I felt like if I wasn't busy, then it meant that I wasn't working hard, or that I wasn't getting as many projects as other people, or I wasn't as successful because I wasn't busy. It was this label that I didn't want to be tarnished with. If you're not busy, you're not successful. And I would see it around me as well. I would use those words, and then I would see other people go, oh yeah, I'm so busy. And we sort of revered this idol of being busy, of working hard, of doing all the hours, 16-hour days. It becomes this symbol. But unfortunately, we cannot sustain this for very long. I know women who have been doing this, and I call this is from a coach of mine, being in Superwoman, right? We've revered this idea of Superwoman. She's doing everything, she's running around, she's on adrenaline, there's a crisis, and she is just like pow, pow, pow. And operating in her is unnatural for us to be at that sort of always working at productivity, that level of productivity. It's very, very unnatural. If we look at the natural systems, right, the way the natural world works, in no way things sort of flourishing and growing and all of the time. There's cycles, and we are ignoring our natural rhythms, our natural signs and signals that tell us when things need to slow down, need to rest, right? And that's as a result of the environment we're operating in as well. Now, we can't sustain it. That's a fact. So I've worked with women who have been operating in Superwoman, have been operating in this sort of mentality for years, 10, 20, 30 years, and completely and utterly depleted. They have nothing. They're like a shell of, nothingness. There's just empty. There's nothing there. The fact is, exhaustion is only 1 or 2 steps from burnout, which is a much harder place to come back from. From that level of depletion. It's really, really hard for us to sort of clear a way forward, to motivate ourselves to move forward. So it is a dangerous place that we need to be aware of the signals up to that point. It impacts our ability to make the changes we want to make in our lives. So even if we want to change, even if we know we need to, we can't draw the strength in order to do it. It eats away at our resilience. So we have to find ways to remedy this before it gets to a place of no return. Now, often when we talk about emotional exhaustion, we're talking about the route to burnout. Again, as I said earlier, we can often think that it sounds too serious for what we're struggling with. But as I said, this is a process of getting there. So Emotional exhaustion is when feelings about stresses and responsibilities mount up to a point that someone feels that they don't have the energy, any energy left to expend to deal with it. So there are a number of signs and symptoms associated with emotional exhaustion. So let's talk about some of those. Now, the first one is something I call Netflix escapism, but it encapsulates far more. So sometimes when we're tired, we tend to try and escape the emotions and psychological work of understanding why we're tired. So instead, we do things we know will sort of provide us with that that short-lived moment of sort of peace, but actually doesn't, it's escapism really, doesn't address the core problem. So we neglect those things that will actually replenish and restore us, and we try to escape this feeling of depletion through distraction. So Netflix escapism, we watch Netflix into the night, we spend a crazy amount of time scrolling through social media. We make excuses as to why we can't exercise. We use our desires. So this is something I use with my clients, the differentiating between needs and desires. Needs are things that we need to function. They get us to okay base zero. Okay base zero is the base level of okay that you need to function and, you know, be okay in yourself. More, if you top that up, you're able to give, you're able to be generous. If you deplete that, that's where you're moving closer and closer into burnout. So desires we can often use instead of addressing our needs to sort of try to replenish, but they're desires. They're things like, you know, alcohol, chocolate, even sex. You know, sometimes we use, you know, sex is sort of a distraction, a way to just get out of the day-to-day mundane stresses. And I'm not saying all of this is unhealthy, you know, a healthy dose of these things and a healthy element of these desires in small amounts, very good for us, you know, to as celebrations or yeah, but used in a way to escape or sort of unhealthy coping mechanisms can be a problem. Depleted executive function. So this is about the prefrontal cortex, is the part of our brain that's is sort of executive thinking. So all of the problem solving, the complex, you know, it's the part of the brain that is unique to the human, right? We have complex thinking part of the brain. Now, that reduces, our cognitive function reduces when we're feeling that depleted. This is especially true in periods of change and heightened uncertainty when our internal threat levels increase. If you've been on one of my programs before, we've got the Thrive challenge happening this week. This is where I explain that. It's actually in the video in the Facebook group today. So if you want to learn more about this, head into that video today. And I also have a tool for how you can address that. So do jump into that video. So our brain craves familiarity, and when it experiences unknowns, where there's change or uncertainty happening around us, it immediately resists it and we struggle to think straight. Basically, blood is redirected to different parts of the body instead of the brain. So we lose our ability to think straight. We can't make decisions. We go into decision paralysis or overload. We can't prioritize tasks. We struggle to organize, and we struggle to set necessary boundaries. Lots of other things like loss of motivation, so on, so on. The other sign is irregular mood swings. So irritability, nervousness, frustration, and emotional exhaustion can also lead to sort of a complete apathy, right? Just a done with all of this, and hopelessness, even for those things that we once were very, very interested and loved. It's a hotbed for our inner critic and imposter. So when we're depleted of energy, when we're not addressing our needs, it is a hotbed for the inner critic and imposter to thrive. She will cultivate in that moment. It will trigger our inner critic more powerfully. You will probably notice that your worrying is escalating. Our inner critic is louder, and we can experience this sort of overload of emotions. The other one is withdrawal. even though in this moment of connection and isolation, in this moment of isolation, when we're really, really sort of craving that connection, we can withdraw. We experience, we want to isolate ourselves and pull away from our networks, sometimes completely inadvertently, like we don't realize we're doing it. And we sort of avoid those social engagements, or we feel like we don't want to burden anyone. We're too tired to talk to anyone. We're feeling too glum, so we don't want to put that on other people. And we're sort of worried it will be too emotionally taxing, so we don't bother. And the physical symptoms. This could be muscle fatigue and tension, headaches, stomach problems, sleep problems. So that you can see that there are a wide variety of sort of signs and symptoms. Now, sometimes our exhaustion is about simply needing to rest. Okay, we just need to get better sleep. I have in the past been on the phone to my coachees and halfway through have been, just said, look, use the next half an hour to have a nap, right? There's no point in us continuing this conversation or trying to address these challenges, trying to think our way through this when you are just completely and utterly depleted. So it's a case of go find some mindfulness or a meditation and just go and sleep. Sometimes it's about needing to replenish our mind, bodies, and soul. We need to feed ourselves. And this is what I talk about in terms of your needs chart. I've talked about it before in the group, but you have, there's your physical needs, your psychological needs, your relational needs, and your spiritual needs. And there are activities in which you can make sure that you are replenishing those needs. So mine is a walk, and that often will cover all 4 of those needs. I do between half an hour and a half walk every day. And it's spiritually, I'm very, very into nature. Spiritually helps me. If I'm with my husband, it's the relational element of it, or I'm talking on the phone to somebody. Psychologically, it's good for me. Being out in nature is very sort of, it allows that clarity for me. And the physical movement of my body. So I'm sure I'll be talking on that a little bit more in the next coming days, so do look out for that. And sometimes our exhaustion is a result of there's lots of conflict around us, or there's lots of chaos, and we just need to find some peace. Now, sometimes we know what the trigger of exhaustion is, right? So sometimes we know, okay, there's a global pandemic right now and it's heightened levels of threat, or, I've just had a newborn baby, or there's a project at work and, it's at its really busy period, right? Change happening around you. So you can sort of identify, I know why I'm exhausted. But sometimes the triggers are not that clear. And over time, there's sort of this compounding effect. Right? There's just layers and layers of exhaustion that can wipe us out very, very suddenly and unexpectedly. So an interesting piece of research that has sort of just completely has been so profound for me in terms of understanding my own levels of exhaustion, understanding how I can manage my own energy, but how emotions work and how I can be better at managing those emotions, especially in order to ensure that I'm not reacting to things, and I'm sort of able to sort of compose myself in a way that I need to, as a leader, as a coach, as a wife, as a family member. So Dr. Emily Nagoski and her sister, they wrote a book called Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking Stress. This work has honestly been so profound in terms of explaining how emotions and the roller coaster that I can go on, how that works and how I can deal with that. So whether it was about, the grief of losing someone, or the exhaustion of sort of finally meeting a deadline from a project, or the fear of doing something new, or the pain I felt from, somebody saying something hurtful, whatever it was, these strategies have really, really worked in understanding this and doing something about it. So in their work, basically, they highlight that an emotion is a neurological event in the body. So what they're saying is that emotion, that it is a chemical reaction that occurs in our body when we feel something. That's why it's called feelings, right? It's physical, we feel it. And it is a neurological cycle, therefore, that runs throughout our entire body. So what they talk about is that emotions don't just sort of exist in our minds, or they don't just sort of, they're not this really like floaty thing that happens. We actually feel them in our body, and we hold emotions in our body. And they talk about this compounding effect, that if we don't complete the cycle of these emotions, if we don't properly deal with these emotions, then there's this sort of compounding effect. And they use the metaphor of a tunnel. Okay, so imagine every emotion is like walking through a tunnel. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end, and there's the light at the end of the tunnel. What often happens is that we walk into an emotion, and I'm just going to let Pooja in. We walk into an emotion and we get stuck in the middle because we don't allow ourselves to complete that emotion. I'm going to explain what that means in a moment, but we often just feel the emotion, we sort of box it up, compartmentalize it somewhere. And what happens is in the middle of this tunnel, there's this compounding effect of years and years, or months and months. Sometimes it's years for people who are just this layers and layers of incomplete emotions that then as a result sort of block that light at the end of the tunnel. It begins to block your ability to see an end. And that's where we fall into emotional exhaustion and burnout. So I think this is a really, really interesting metaphor, and it really, really has helped me to understand why I need to allow emotions, why I need to feel them and process them. So if we don't process emotions fully by getting to the end of that cycle, the end of that tunnel, it leads us to emotional exhaustion and burnout. And that compounding effect of incomplete emotion residing in the body will cause us to blow or completely just go within ourselves. So if we're in agreement that emotions are cycles that physically travel through our bodies, we carry all the weight of those emotions in our bodies, then in order to finish the cycle, we have to use our bodies. If they're sitting in our body, they're residing in our bodies, then we need to use our bodies in order to complete them. So what they talk about is a series of science-based, so research-based methods for using our bodies to complete this cycle. And they talk about sort of crying, laughing, hugging, and we're going to talk about those in a moment and why they are effective at helping us to complete that cycle. Okay, this is not to say these things that they've researched are going to take away the stress. They're not going to take away the stimulus, the stressor that was, created that emotion in the first place, but they help us to manage the emotions, manage the stress in a way that allows us to be able to problem solve and deal with those stresses in the first place. So we're going to talk about those 7 scientific research-based methods for completing the emotional cycle in a moment. I just want to finish talking about some of the other signs and triggers and some of the methods that we can use to address emotional exhaustion and burnout. So first of all, if you're unable to identify a specific trigger, right, you're just like, there's no reason for me to feel like this. And yet you're feeling this sort of bone aching tiredness and no amount of rest or replenishment in the things that we're going to be talking about, like no amount of this stuff is working, then please do consult your GP. There may be something else at play here, whether it's physical or psychological. So please do reach out for help, your coach, a friend, your partner, and consider doing, this is something I do with my coachees, an energy audit. And if you want access to this tool that I have, just let me know and I can sort of help you with that. So here's what we can do about it. Set boundaries. I know this is easily said than done. We can be empathetic with others and compassionate and leaders whilst setting boundaries for ourselves, okay? For a person to function well, we need to be able to set solid foundations of, sleep, enough sleep, good nutrition, physical exercise, getting some of those needs elements done, whether it's a walk every day, taking yourself out of situations, whatever it is, having boundaries is really, really important. So just to go back to the needs chart that I talked about, those 4 needs that you need to make sure you're replenishing. Again, I've done a video on this, so I will, for anyone who wants to understand this a bit more, I will tag you, just let me know, and I will tag you in the video that I did on this, on how you can make sure that you're meeting those needs and get yourself to OK base 0. Don't be Superwoman. Okay, Superwoman, we have, or retire Superwoman. Okay, for a moment, we can engage Superwoman, you know, when there's a crisis and we need her for like 15 minutes, you know, maybe we could operate in Superwoman for like 15 hours and be okay. But if you're operating in Superwoman 15 days, 15 months, 15 years, it's a very, very dangerous place to be. So we need to set those boundaries and be willing to, in ourselves as well. And sometimes we need to decrease the expectation, right? If your standard is always sort of creating beautiful meals from scratch, right? Have a frozen meal, have a takeaway, have a can of soup, you know, it's okay. Lower those levels of expectations and think about who is setting those expectations. What is causing you to feel that those expectations exist? Is it yourself? Is it others? So retiring Superwoman, make sure that you're setting boundaries and you're understanding your needs, and those 4 sort of areas are really important. And the third one is think about what replenishes you, what refills you emotionally, what nourishes you, what makes you laugh, and what gives you peace, what gives you clarity. Make sure that you're incorporating those activities into your needs chart, those 4 areas: psychological needs, physical needs, relational needs, and spiritual needs. Okay, so to go back to Nagoski's, just to finish up, the Nagoski sisters stress cycle. So they talk about the tunnel, the stress cycle. These are the 7 things, so scientifically proven ways to complete the stress cycle or complete an emotion. 1, physical activity. So any form of movement, all right? That could be a walk, it could be stretching, whatever it is. So these are some of the obvious ones, right? We know they're good for us, but we just can't seem to motivate ourselves to do them. Any type of physical activity, right? A walk down the shop. Breathing. So they actually talk about breathing out longer than you breathe in, which engages the parasympathetic nervous system, which is almost like the internal, like on a computer, the fan system in the computer. It engages your calm hormones as such, right? So breathing, you know, you breathe in 2, breathe out 4, breathe in 4, breathe out 6. So breathing out longer than you breathe in. Positive social interaction. A little bit difficult in a pandemic, whilst we're all isolating, but they talk about here, so even the subtle exchanges of saying hello to someone at the cashier, of smiling, you know, difficult to do in a mask, but I have practiced smiling with my eyes. So even these tiny little social interactions have a huge impact on allowing us to sort of complete those emotions and complete the stress cycle. Laughter, big laugh out loud, belly laughter, okay? Right? There is such a physical sort of exertion of energy. Affection. So recent research from neuroscientists show that a hug, even hugging yourself, right? So just grabbing yourself and hugging yourself. What we're doing here by all of these things, that we're making our bodies feel safe. We're telling our brains that we are safe. And this is one of them. You know, a 20-second hug, it creates some form of like hormone reaction that signals that we are safe, you know, that falling into somebody's body or holding yourself, hugging yourself. And the last 2 is a big old cry. Okay, there is a reason why we cry. Okay, there's a reason why that exists in us. This is an exertion of energy, of emotion. Often people, and this is something I've experienced, often people fear that if they start crying, they're never going to be able to stop. And there is a therapist who recommended, allow yourself to cry, so let yourself cry, and within that period of time, instead of thinking about what made you cry, so the event, the experience that made you cry, think about the act of crying itself. So think about the tears on your face. Be very present with, you know, the way your shoulders are shaking, where you're experiencing sort of the emotion. And in being present in our bodies, almost certainly we're likely to stop, right? Because we're being present in that moment. When we're thinking about the crying itself, the feeling of crying, we often will cry within 5 minutes, we'll stop within 5 minutes. And the other one, which I find is really, really interesting, is creative expression. Any form of, so I had a coachee who she makes these beautiful canvas bags. She's an artist, she doesn't necessarily do anything with it, but now she started to create these eco-friendly canvas bags with all of her designs, and they're beautiful designs. And this is, she talked about sort of when she would get into a depressive state, she would just channel all of that into this sort of, into her art. And we don't need to be artists in order to do this. This could be even an imaginary sort of creative creation would work. So Ngozi talks about, you know, even imagining, right? Say you're getting quite stressed about this whole COVID situation. You know, she talked about imagining this massive, like, dinosaur stamping all over the COVID virus. You know, even these sort of like a creative thought processes can help us to complete this cycle, if not something physical. Okay, I have talked and talked and talked, so it is time for us to have a little chat. So I'm going to stop recording at this moment, and we're going to talk a little around some of these ideas and some of the things that you may have experienced. Is there anything that's really, really relating to you? Is there anything that you feel a bit of conflict with? Anything that you want to challenge? And let's talk around how we've